The following program has been pre-recorded, so please don't call in at this time. If you wish to participate in the program, tune in at 5 p.m. every Wednesday for A Pause for Thought on Baton Rouge Community Radio. Good evening, fellow humans. This is Wayne Parker with A Pause for Thought here on Baton Rouge Community Radio, 96.9 FM. Here in the palatial studios of Baton Rouge Community Radio. Anyway, good evening, everyone. Just like to remind everybody that this is a live call-in show. It really is tonight. I'm not a recording at the moment. 343-9927 is the number to call. 343-9927. And before I let you know the topic, I'd like to thank Lang Baker for joining me in the studio, as he often does. Good evening, Lang.
Howdy, Wayne.
And Lang, as you know, since you're prepared, our topic for tonight will be primarily detention centers for asylum seekers and related issues. But we'll talk about basically the detention centers that have been springing up like mushrooms all over the country, really, and also in Louisiana. But Lang, I'd first like to start off with a little bit of a history of immigration to America, and I promise I won't be so long that it'll be tedious, okay?
Okay.
I'm looking at a timeline of agricultural labor by the National Farm Worker Ministry, and they start out in the 1600s, where they say here that indentured servants were brought from England to work in the fields. They were guaranteed passage into the colonies in exchange for their labor. From the 1650s to 1800s, the indentured servants weren't enough, so we started kidnapping Africans and enslaving them here in the country to work the fields. And then following this is one that's interesting, following the end of the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 48, tens of thousands of migrant workers from Mexico began arriving in the United States. In many cases, they freely moved across the border for temporary jobs and then returned home. Well, yeah, but chances are there were a whole lot of Americans who were Mexicans until the U.S. annexed half their country. But anyway, 1860s, 1930s, farming became a large-scale industry, so along with the black slaves, farmers began importing Asian labor along with the African Americans. And of course, at that time, too, the Africans had been freed finally by Lincoln, and they were moving north into the factories and the industrial areas and facing the new kind of same problems there. But anyway, 1930s was the Great Depression, which meant that a lot of small farmers went out of business and had to become migrant workers themselves. And it was important here, and this is important to my next point, Lang, that finally in this period the U.S. government also passed a series of labor laws to protect workers, but that excluded the farm workers and domestic laborers. So there you go, and now today, probably partly because of that, they stay here from the 1970s on until today. Most farm workers are immigrants from Latin America, and it's calculated that up to 75% of them are undocumented. 75% of almost all of the migrant workers are undocumented. And the vast majority of them are from Mexico and Central America. And like I mentioned before the show, Lang, I guess it's a good thing for the farmers that Trump's tariffs have destroyed their business. Otherwise, their crops will be laying in the field rotting because they don't have any migrants to harvest them. But speaking of Mexicans working, or Latin American people working in the United States, I think you're all aware of the story, and keeping in mind this history here, but what happened last August in Mississippi at the chicken processing plants where 700 Latin American people were detained by ICE. ICE went in and arrested them, took them away, left their kids, without a parent in some cases, and that was all done there. And I don't know if the listeners know that the history about these chicken processing plants either, but for a long time, after America's appetite for chicken exploded, the workers in these processing plants were primarily African American, because they would work cheaper because weren't allowed to get a lot of the better jobs, but they'd work more cheaply in these jobs that were both dangerous and disgusting and and very hard for low pay. However, they began to organize a labor union, and when that happened, one of the companies, and I can't see the name here, one of the owners of the chicken processing plant created a program that they called the Hispanic Project, where they would send people out recruiting people from Latin America and Cuba and bringing them up there to work. And then they got the idea of offering a $600 bonus to these employees to bring more people up, and they get $600 per head that stayed for at least 3 months. So eventually they got to the point where they didn't have to send their own people out recruiting. They just came up in all kinds of ways. And the trick was, as has been discovered since these raids, the companies knew that a lot of these immigrants were undocumented. They knew it. And, of course, word got passed to the communities in south of the border that, hey, you could come up here and get a job even if you don't have the papers, because the employers want you and they won't tell anybody. Unfortunately, now they're busted, okay, but the only people getting punished are the migrants. You can imagine that. So anyway, and of course they're being put into detention centers, which are sprouting up, and that's my segue into Lang's area of expertise, although I can pull my weight somewhat there too. But you're listening to Wayne Parker and Lang Baker here on A Pause for Thought. We're talking about ICE detainees and detention centers. 343-9927 is the number to call, 343-9927. Give us a call and share your thoughts and questions with us. We'd love to hear from you. Okay, Lang, maybe I'm talking too fast, but
I would reject the label of expertise here. I did a lot of research and found out how hard it is to get all the details about ICE detention facilities in the state of Louisiana. And I'm not alone in this. Senator Warren sent a letter to the acting director of ICE asking for some questions about the detention facilities that the information wasn't even available to her through normal channels. I did do some looking on the internet, and I found the Louisiana facilities are under the jurisdiction of the ICE office down in New Orleans, and on their website they list 5 detention centers, but that's not all of them. And that's one of the things in Senator Warren's letter, is the fact that there are reports of detention centers that ICE has not revealed to the public are detention centers. And her letter specifically cites 3 new detention centers, one in Mississippi and 2 in Louisiana, that had been reported in an article in Mother Jones magazine. And so she's asking all kinds of questions about that and about the process and about the contracts. I can get into that later, but to get back to the facilities that are in the state, there are, from what I was able to determine, there are 4 facilities operated by the private organization Geo Group, which operates private prisons all over the world, I believe, but they had 4 facilities in Louisiana, 3 of which apparently are ICE detention centers, and 1 is an ICE staging center where they don't hold longer than 72 hours. It's located on the grounds of the airport in Alexandria, so it's like the detainees come in there, and within 72 hours they're shipped out to some other location. Then there are quite a few facilities operated by the LaSalle Corrections Organization. I was able to, from their website, to identify 10 detention facilities they operate in the state of Louisiana, but it's unclear whether those all have ICE detainees in them, or whether it's mixed ICE detainees and prisoners from the criminal justice system, or whether it's no ICE detainees in all criminal justice system. incarcerated people.
Right.
But in any event, some of those are admittedly ICE detention centers. They're listed on the New Orleans ICE office website as being ICE for ICE detainees, and some of them are operated jointly, according to the LaSalle website, by the local sheriff and the LaSalle Corrections Operation. And then there are a number of detention facilities that are strictly operated by local law enforcement, by sheriffs. I found one in particular in Allen County, where the sheriff there, because of budgetary problems, was looking for ways to shore up the financing for the sheriff's department, and so he's entered into a contract with ICE for constructing a facility to accommodate 200 detainees.
Right.
At an expected fee of $50-something a day, which is more than he's paying for his own convicted incarcerated people that he's paying to have them housed somewhere else for $25 a day.
The dangerous people being pushed away somewhere else to make room for the moneymakers.
Yeah, so it's pretty opaque is the bottom line here.
Yeah, and that's, sounds a lot like Guantanamo Bay and the U.S.'s extraordinary renditions. I mean, they're putting these people away and nobody can find them. In fact, that's one thing that's been causing problems in the prisons, as we talked about before the show. Before we do that, though, I wanted to mention that there had been a Trump policy in place that allowed ICE to deny parole to detained asylum seekers who lawfully present themselves at officials at ports of entry. These are people that qualify to apply for asylum, and they're detained in centers in Louisiana all over the country, but they were automatically being denied parole, no matter what. And let's see, in District of Columbia, preliminary injunction in a lawsuit challenging the Department of Homeland Security and Immigration Customs Enforcement. On May 30th, 2019, the Southern Poverty Law Center and ACLU Louisiana won a case with U.S. District Judge James Boasberg to overturn that, and the ICE was ordered to open up the parole process to all detainees. The problem now, though, is that there are not enough judges to judge the cases, so these people are being, kept around for very long periods of time.
Yeah, that's one of the problems, and there's also the problem of the attorneys being able to find out where the clients are, which is one of the issues raised in Senator Warren's letter about there's supposed to be this place. I saw the webpage today where you can enter either the A number, which is some number that's been assigned to the detainee, or you can enter some descriptive information about their name and that sort of stuff, and it's supposed to tell you where the person is. Only apparently a lot of the folks that are being detained, they aren't in that system, and Senator Warren's asking about that. Why is that so? And did you give notice to these people before they were transferred to these new facilities that the ICE hasn't even acknowledged, or hadn't at that point acknowledged, were being used as detention facilities? Had they notified the lawyers for these people? Had they notified the family members? So it's like they've fallen into a black hole where nobody
even knows where they are,
right.
Can't even help them or get in to talk to them.
Right.
They can't even see their lawyers. I'd like to remind everybody you're listening to Wayne Parker and Lang Baker here on A Pause for Thought. We're talking about asylum seekers and the detention centers where they're being housed. 343-9927, 343-9927. Give us a call. And Lang, something else that I found out about a few weeks ago, I'm involved with a local group here in Baton Rouge that's assisting asylum seekers where we can. And back when we were still allowed to go into the local bus station to meet buses where migrants were getting off to take a break, they were passing through Baton Rouge. We were providing them with water, snacks, feminine products, and things like that. But there was a young woman that came in one night around 8:30 on one of the buses, and she was an asylum seeker. She had just ridden the bus from San Antonio. and her husband was supposed to have met her there at the station, and he wasn't there. And she only spoke Spanish. So, we didn't know what to do. So fortunately, we called somebody we knew who did speak Spanish, and she talked to her on the phone, and that's how we learned that, her husband didn't show up. But imagine how frightened she must have been, if we stayed with her until somebody she knew finally showed up. But the woman that served as our interpreter called the phone number she had and then tracked down a brother of her husband, and he came and got her. But just imagine, people just going off into this country and disappearing and not knowing where their families are, knowing that their families don't know where they are, and that's got to be terrifying. And just last week, actually, I got a call because of this group I'm in about a detainee that was about to be bonded out at Pine Prairie Detention Center. And they said that they had nobody to pick him up. His family was in Miami, and they were prepared to buy a bus ticket for him once he could get to a bus station that went there. And they called us and asked if one of us would go up and get him. Now, this guy spoke only Spanish, and he was deaf. And if he'd been bonded out with nobody to come and get him, ICE would have just put him at the door and said, later, you're on your own, probably in Spanish. But then again, maybe not, since most of the guards in these detention centers don't know how to speak Spanish. But and as it ended up, he was denied. His bond was denied, and I was told today that he was bonded out last week. So he did, and the attorney that got him out transported him. But this is what these people are facing right now, and that was at Pine Prairie, and that was also one place where there has been some unrest. Isn't that true?
Yes, I was mentioned in one of these articles here. Put my finger on it here. It was a BuzzFeed article that came out on August the 6th, so it was just a little over a month ago. According to this article, there were 100 immigrants detained there at the Pine Prairie facility who were pepper sprayed. They had been in an outdoor recreation area and refused to go back inside, apparently because they weren't being able to have their cases heard. There had been a hunger strike going on there as well. 115 immigrants had been on a hunger strike for 5 days, because they weren't their cases
weren't going anywhere.
Weren't being able to be processed
Right.
because of the lack of judges you were speaking of
Right.
earlier, and the lack of attorney contacts and that sort of thing.
And there was also a hunger strike at River Center up in Faraday, Louisiana. And as I found out, they were originally just a regular run-of-the-mill garden variety jail for criminal offenders. And a portion of it, they either added part of it to it or reserved a portion of it strictly for ICE detainees, and so they're being detained there. And those detainees went on a hunger strike because of the same reason. They couldn't get their cases heard, and they couldn't see their lawyers either. And they went on a hunger strike, and so the jail, the detention center, punished them by putting each one in solitary confinement. And we already know that's torture, really, to be be that way. So
yeah, well, there was also a hunger strike in detainees pepper sprayed at the Bossier Parish Medium Security Facility, which is one that's operated by a sheriff's department. It's not by one of these private institutions. From what I was able to see on the website for that facility, they have a capacity to detain 600 individuals there, and this article said that 300 of those, or half of them, were ICE detainees.
Yeah.
So normally it's a medium security prison for the parish for their criminal justice system, but they were using half of the capacity to house ICE detainees, apparently because they could make some
more
money that way.
Yes, and I have a similar story here from it's an article from the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. The headline reads, "Nobody leaves here unless they're deported. A look at disturbing new immigration detention centers." And they mentioned the detention center up in Faraday. and they managed to get up there and get permission to see 3 different detainees. And they changed their names, of course. They call them Adam, Anthony, and Matthew. Anyway, I was going to make a joke, but decided that probably was not the time for it. But while they were waiting to talk to these guys, these detainees, they say here in the article that a guard explained to us that several buses of people incarcerated there for criminal convictions had just been moved out, and that about 80 immigrants were bussed in to take their place. But they later learned that it was actually 200 detainees that were brought in. And you know what I thought as soon as we talked about that before the show. Apparently, they're seeing money. I think you mentioned $58 per head per day, and Natalia Dixon on our last live show said it was roughly $60, like that.
Yeah, when I was calling around, I mean, I did some research over the internet that I was describing earlier, but I also got some phone numbers there, and so I was calling around trying to get some answers to confirm the capacity numbers I had, and then to ask, well, how many ICE detainees are actually being detained there in comparison to what their capacity was, and then I was going to ask how much a day the fee was that ICE was paying for this, but I didn't get that far because I couldn't even get the answer. I called all 4 of the geo sites because I could get individual numbers for the locations there, and every one of them, in one way or another, said, "Well, you'll have to look on our website. I can't give you any information." One of them gave me a email address to send my request to, and I did, and I've so far have not gotten a reply from that email request.
Well, surely you contacted our state, our senators, our U.S. senators.
Well, I gave a call this morning to both senators and to our Congressman Garrett Graves, telling them I was going to be discussing ICE detention centers in Louisiana on a radio show this afternoon, and asking if they had any comment about ICE detention centers in Louisiana, just that general. But, of course, I had to leave a voicemail message, and, of course, I haven't heard anything back.
No.
But
could not be reached for comment, I think, is the official.
Yeah, that would be the jargon. Yeah.
Yes.
And then I sent a link after I was unsuccessful in getting a live person at the ICE Center in New Orleans to ask about the detention centers in the state. They had an email address that I sent off a request for just some basic information, like what are the facilities, because I have a list and I don't know if they are all accurate or if I'm missing some, and what's the capacity and what's the occupancy of these, and in bold red letters, how quickly can I expect a response? Well, I haven't even gotten a response to how quickly I can get a response to the individual questions. But if anybody else would like to try, the email address is on their website. And the email address is communityrelations.neworleans.ice.dhs.gov. That's communityrelations.neworleans@ice.dhs.gov. And you can just search on Google for ICE New Orleans Community Relations Officer, and this ought to come up because that's the title of the individual. It's supposed to be the Community Relations Officer, not somebody that has to deal with other business of ICE. This person is responsible for community relations.
Right.
And so I called the phone number and wasn't able to get a response, and then I sent an email and I haven't gotten a response. And if anybody's interested in the phone number for ICE in New Orleans for the community relations officer, that would be 504-310-8822.
Okay, and how about leaving that out so we can share it right before we end the show?
Sure.
Okay, one more time.
Sure.
I wanted to get back to these 3 detainees at the River Center up in Faraday. The people that went up there to meet them said that they were brought out shackled hands and feet throughout the whole visit. Now, these guys aren't even criminals.
Well, yeah, and the rules are if there is a criminal defendant in a criminal trial and you need to shackle them, you have to do it in a way where the jury can't see it because it would be so prejudicial. So the idea is it's only an extreme situation where you shackle an individual because of the threat individual poses.
Yeah. Well, I don't. They weren't at a trial here, though, so I guess.
Yeah, but there wouldn't be any threat either. Apparently,
good point. Yeah.
An individually determined threat if they're doing it en masse to all of the detainees.
Right. It must cost a lot in shackles too, I guess. But
Yeah,
what the
well,
heck, they're not paying for
somebody has a contract for the shackles,
Yep.
to supply the shackles. So,
Yeah, and before I get on to the next point, which I thought was particularly outrageous because it just occurred to me how many detainees might have fallen for this stunt, but I had some facts here I gleaned from an organization called freedomforimmigrants.org. And they say here that since immigrant detainees aren't charged with a criminal offense, they do not have the same rights as those that do, such as the right to an attorney, the right to a speedy trial, which those things don't exist for poor people in America either, even if they're citizens, because they can't pay the bail, they can't get out anyway, and they can't afford an attorney. It says here also that often conditions are so bad and detention is so long that asylum seekers choose deportation rather than stay in the detention center until their case is finally heard. And or they riot, or they go on hunger strikes, or other things, as we're finding out finally. By the way, the altercation and pepper spraying at the Pine Prairie Detention Center was not publicized. Somewhere in here I read where they didn't let the media know that it even happened.
yep.
So, and the other fact from the Freedom for Immigrants is that 70% of immigrant detainees are held in privately owned facilities. And I'd like to talk about the facility that the sheriff was bragging about. They told me, not yet. I'm going to get back right here. Get one more thing about these guys at the River Center. Matthew, one of the detainees, had all of his legal paperwork in a manila envelope and asked us to review a paper he was told to sign. Okay, ICE or the prison officials told him to sign this particular document, but it was in English, and he didn't understand English. He couldn't understand what any of it said. And they looked it over, and what they say here is it was a parole determination document from ICE saying that they would not be letting him free to pursue his asylum case from outside detention. And one section of the form had two checkboxes, one to accept the decision and another to challenge his ongoing detention in front of a judge. The top box, accepting the decision, was already checked. And he refused to sign that document, fortunately, because he would have been signing his right away, and he could be kept there even longer than he has been already. But imagine how many guys went ahead and signed this, as they were told, not knowing what they were doing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what police do in third world countries. Anyhow, you were going to talk about that. I wanted you to talk about that sheriff that was bragging about the new facility.
There's two sides to the story. This is a sheriff in Allen Parish who was trying to solve the budget problem that the sheriff's department was facing when he took office. They were like $800,000. He uses loose language, so I don't know if that was an annual budget deficit or whether that was just how far behind they were accumulated or whatever. But he was looking for a way to solve that problem, and the solution he saw, since they were housing some ICE detainees in the regular parish jail at a rate of $50-something a day,
at a cost of $50 a day. Yeah.
Well, he was paying $25 a day to have overflow prisoners handled somewhere else.
Okay.
And he was receiving payment from ICE for $50-something a day for the ICE detainees, and so they got bonds approved and issued to construct a 200 capacity facility to house ICE detainees under contract, where he was seeing this as a way to solve their budgetary problem by bringing in an extra, he was figuring over $1 million a year, and I'm assuming that must be surplus, because when you multiply it out, it's like the gross is over $4 million
Right.
a year if they had it full capacity. But the downside potential, I couldn't get a copy of, track down the bonding or the decisions behind issuing the bonds and what the contract was, but it was to be backed up, the payment off of these bonds, from the revenues. And what if ICE stop sending them prisoners, and so they don't get any of this income, but they've still got to pay off these bonds.
Right, good point.
And it's a problem for rural parishes all over the state of meeting their budgetary needs with diminishing populations. And,
right.
And so it needs to be addressed another way than trying to...
Right, because that way is probably going to end since they're keeping all of the asylum seekers in Mexico now. But anyway, we don't have time for the phone number and email again, but...
Google it.
Yeah, anybody can find anything they need, just look it up. I'm at a loss for words. I'm not going to give you my home phone number anyway. Anyhow, you've been listening to Wayne Parker and Lang Baker here on A Pause for Thought, talking about immigrant detainees, ICE detainees, and the detention centers they're in. We got to go. You have a good night.